welcome everybody to this special event. I'm extremely happy to see so many of you. Yeah, so maybe those who are not presenting, remember to be muted. Yeah, I cannot do that all the time. Yeah. So keep yourself muted, please. Okay, so welcome to this panel 4 of the 24-hour relay Compassionate Futures in honor of the life and achievements of Venerable Master Xinyan, co-organized by a consortium of Fuguangshan aligned centers for humanistic Buddhism, and as the only outlier, us, the Dutch Buddhist Seminary at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And for our part of this wonderful event that goes through the globe in 24 hours, we are actually focusing on that, what we are doing at the Dutch Buddhist Seminary, and that is to educate Buddhist chaplains for the Dutch civil service, especially in the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Defense. So welcome everybody. My name is Scherer, and I together with our fantastic team here at the Dutch Seminary, we are really, really happy to have you here. In the first part of this panel, we are welcoming 3 distinguished international guests that all come from a non-Dutch time zone. So specifically, this is amazing that people from Japan and from the US have said yes to my request to come to this international part of the panel. And we have actually fantastic scholars and experts in Buddhist spiritual care here that will tell us something about their thoughts, research, and experiences. And with that, I want to start introducing our first speaker. Every speaker will speak for 20 minutes roughly. And if we at the end have some time for questions, then we see how we can do that. Our first speaker is Reverend Dr. Nathan Jishin Michon. And he or they are a Shingon Buddhist priest, an interfaith minister and chaplain, and a scholar. Jishin, benevolent heart in Japanese, as you know, completed their PhD in religious studies from Graduate Theological Union, also has an MDiv in Buddhist Chaplaincy from the US, and worked during the pandemic with hospice and memory care residents of a nursing home. Jishin specializes in crisis and disaster care. Among other works, Jishin is the editor of 1,000 Hands, a very well-known, one of the first co-edited volumes on Buddhist spiritual care, a co-author of the Oxford Encyclopedia of Religion entry on Buddhist chaplaincy, and editor of the recent book Refuge in the Storm, Buddhist Voices in Crisis Care. On the other side, they are also co-director of Interfaith Ministry Education for Unity and Diversity World Council. So let's welcome very warmly Jishin, Reverend Jishin, to us to talk about today about resilience, compassion, Buddhist forms of compassion and chaplaincy practice. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the introduction, and hello. I am based in Japan these days, but at the moment in Honolulu, Hawaii. Such is my life. I just finished a 2-day seminar for Jodo Shinshu priests in Hawaii, and a sort of training program for all of them in deepening spiritual care practice as well. So my time zones are just all jumbled at the moment, so you'll have to excuse any little pauses with a bit of a crazy sleep schedule this week. Anyways, again, my topic here is a resilient compassion. A little typo in the title there, I apologize. But especially at this point, focusing a little more on, for chaplaincy itself, how do we develop this compassion in spiritual care? And in that sense, this talk is a little bit more pedagogic focused. And through some previous talks with B, there was one model that they asked me to develop further. And so it's a little bit of further develop on one particular part of this pedagogical model in developing compassion. So in some sense, this is also a very Buddhist spiritual care pedagogy, largely focused on Kanon or Avalokiteshvara, Guanyin. And there's a couple slides because it's it's a little bit long. So I'll just warn you, there's a few slides in here that I'll be going through a little bit quickly. But there are, through this process, essentially two interacting frameworks that work together. One, increasing skillfulness in the depth with forms of compassion, while also trying to increase the capacity to hold different forms of compassion, and as well complementary capacities. So the idea is that compassion within these different Buddhist frameworks essentially never comes alone. It is always presented and developed alongside other capacities. So just a little bit before getting into the depth of these different capacities, from a pedagogical perspective, this would come with a lot of reflection questions, meditations, and also different styles of role-playing that are developed. I'm only going to focus more on the reflection question aspects of these different capacities for today. And this this is one of the slides I think I'll run through a little more quickly than it really deserves, but I briefly say that Japan itself has developed theories and models of spiritual care in a number of ways. And I do think it's valuable, if I have more time, to present some of those to other places as well, because there's, of course, these language barriers between these different spiritual care realms within the world. But from a Buddhist perspective, as opposed to many areas in the West, Japan is most of the people teaching and promoting spiritual care now in modern Japan are Buddhists. And so many of the models are also, as opposed to these little more monotheistic centric models, governing some of the principles of spiritual care, there are more directly Buddhist principles influencing those models, which can be rather interesting. And so this is only the picture of one of those, but there are, you might see in here in this picture some influence, at least from things like the three mysteries, body, speech, and mind, connecting to different levels of development of the spirituality, its connection to society, etc. So again, I apologize. These models I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on today, but we'll just at least say that there is a lot of interesting work going on in Japan, and some of this more Buddhist influence coming into those models. I want to focus in a little more on this particular model of, oh, is there something? I want to focus in a little more on this particular model today of the Taizo mandala, or the Garbakosa mandala. And I'm essentially using this as an idea of development of compassion. And in the Shingon tradition, this is the compassion-focused mandala in connection with another mandala that's more focused on wisdom. And yet, as we see, even within this particular model of compassion, it is very interconnected with a whole variety of different traits and practices. I will focus a little more especially on one particular dimension of this mandala that's more associated with Kanon and Avalokiteshvara. And one other slide, I'll skip or go through very quickly, but just to say other Buddhist models as well show that compassion is very interconnected with other traits and practices, the Brahma Viharas being one, showing we don't only develop compassion on its own, but in connection to these other practices like loving kindness, joy, and equanimity. So getting into this Taizo mandala more specifically, I'll just go through briefly each of these sections in a way. And I won't necessarily go through all the questions listed here, but I at least list some of the reflection questions inspired by the themes or main ideas of each section of the mandala. And so this first one is essentially about the origin of awakenings, but in a practical sense for developing spiritual care and for essentially, especially practitioners of spiritual care for their service. Some of these reflections include, what is my most ideal self? What conditions help inspire or lead to my best states of mind? What habits might I start or stop? So this is, in a sense, an entry point, an entryway into these compassionate practices. As we go lower in the mandala, but still fairly central, the theme at this other hall where you see the more fiery figures, the Vidyarajas or Myo-o, in Buddhist terms. Their theme is more on, rather than developing certain qualities, more on eliminating certain negative qualities. In this case, especially the three poisons, craving, aversion, and ignorance. Reflections in this area can include what unhealthy desires or attachments prevent or distract my presence with another suffering in front of me. How do I essentially release myself from some of these more negative qualities that might interfere with the service? Now, moving into the left, this is almost the center focus of compassion within the compassion mandala itself. And so I want to, in a sense, get a little more, sorry, some of these particular, I think something happened when I copied this slide, but at least the picture, this is on the left end of the mandala, and I'll get into a little more detail of some of the specific figures here and their themes. So one of just in the Buddhist tradition, as you may be aware, there are many different forms of this figure, Avalokiteshvara, who's considered this embodiment of compassion. And so in contemporary psychology, they are only in the recent decade, especially a little bit the recent couple of decades, increasing a lot of studies on compassion and finally distinguishing different forms of compassion and what that might mean for our own development of compassion. But of course, in Buddhism, we have all these different Avalokiteshvaras that do have for centuries represented many different aspects of compassion as well. So I just list a few here today. But this Byakuwe Kanon, in a sense, represents more the purity of compassion. So some of these reflections related to Byakuwe can be to what degree is my compassion truly directed at others' needs. Upon honest, deeper reflection, at what times might my compassion also include selfish points, or at what times might my focus shift to my other experiences with suffering rather than the person in front of me. So this aspect of trying to embody this part of compassion that's more trying to get into the more purity of it itself. Whereas another form of kanon, Avalokiteshvara, is this thousand-armed, relating to trying to adapt to the various needs represented in others in front of us, who may be in front of us. So some reflections along these lines might include, are my compassionate responses a one-size-fits-all, or do they change in the different situations that I confront? And if so, to what degree? How can I better adapt to those needs of others? One of the more interesting forms of Avalokiteshvara Kanon that not as many people are aware of is this more fierce variety, in Japanese called Bato Kanon. A main theme here, strident and defilement crushing compassion. A little more related to what in English we call this more tough love. And so some reflections might be, what times might I need to carry on this tough love with the person in front of me? When can I be more strict? And when do I need to be more strict? But when I am more strict with another, can I still maintain that compassion inside me, that spirit of compassion? Another figure, Nyo-irin Kanon, a theme or the idea behind Nyo-irin Kanon often focused on this wish-fulfilling aspect, but also compassion to all different forms of beings. So some reflections can include, to what degree can I consistently maintain my hope for another's suffering to diminish? And does my compassion increase or decrease depending on the person or their responses? In what ways can I improve upon those aspects? Is my self-care sufficient enough to maintain my hopeful compassion also over long stretches of time? But even though, as you can see in this mandala, there's actually 21 forms, we could get very, very specific. Those are some examples, at least, of some of the more specific forms of compassionate focus. It's also balanced in many ways through these other parts of the mandala itself. So just to go over some of those a little more briefly, on the right end, Kongosata or Vajrasattva focuses more on the virtues of great wisdom, although in many ways also how does that balance with the compassion of the whole. So some of the reflections essentially show this balance of the wisdom and compassion, but also a little bit of a theme of equanimity. Can I stay grounded in the situations that I enter compassionately? Moving up, the hall is related to Shakyamuni, especially, but there is also an aspect within the focuses traditionally represented here that focus more on purity of body in complement to previous focuses and other focuses in other parts of the mandala that are more on the purity of speech and mind. So these reflections are a little more physically focused in a way, bodily and embodied focuses. Am I maintaining a daily practice that supports my work in the world? Am I taking care of my body in a way that supports that work? And how, essentially, how much can I consistently maintain a mindfulness of body through that work? A Manjushri hall, in this case of focus, being not moved in a way, being especially grounded within one's work. So an example of these reflections. Have I established proper boundaries? Are they healthy boundaries? What can I do to increase and maintain my balance through which I enter a variety of daily situations? Moving on to the left was this Jizo Kshitigarbha hall. A theme here being facing and being with suffering. So reflections can include, what varieties of another's suffering am I most able to sit with and be almost or fully present with? Are there some types of suffering that I witness that are too difficult to handle? If so, why? What can I do to better prepare myself to be with that suffering? And on the complementary end, or on the other end of this, called the Jogaisho Hall, this is focused more on overcoming what are called the 5 hindrances in Buddhism. So some reflection on this are about more, can I find a space in between the cravings and aversions, avoiding both sides of that? Can I avoid both sides in my actions of drowsiness or having too much energy into a situation? In my current sleep schedule, I'm not sure how I am on the drowsiness side. But
We also need to wrap it up a little bit if you can.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Sorry, I wasn't sure what time I started. So I'll just go through very briefly on the other ones. The Kokuzo Hall essentially, in a way, wraps up all of this together. So it's focused on the fruits of these practices themselves and how they really manifest in one's life and work. So just going back to these frameworks itself, these two interacting processes of both developing skill through these different traits, but also a capacity to hold the different forms of compassion, so that it's essentially a system of both developing depth into them, but also a breadth of different aspects to the spiritual care itself. Only a brief suffering to this or a brief introduction to this model, but thank you very much for your attention and intentions today.
Thank you so much, and yeah, you can hear us clap in your mind. It's wonderful. And thank you for responding to my request for the time. Wonderful. Let's move on to the second speaker. And if we have at the end, we have time, maybe we have some questions. Thank you so much. So the next speaker I want to introduce with great delight is Dr. Kenneth Holloway. He's the Levison Professor of Japanese History at Florida Atlantic University. And there he also directs the Asian Studies Certificate Program and co-directs the Center for Body, Mind, and Culture. Now, Ken is a truly prolific scholar in East Asian history and thought. And among his many fantastic books and articles is, I just mentioned, his 2013 Quest for Ecstatic Morality in Early China with Oxford, and the recent edited volume Buddhism and the Body that came out in 2023 with Brill. Ken is further a humanistic Buddhist lay Dharma teacher and chaplain affiliated with Fu Guangchan and an active member of Fu Guangchan's socially engaged outreach organization, BLIA, or Buddha Light International Association. So let's welcome very, very warmly Dr. Holloway, who's going to talk to us about chanting meditation as a potential tool in chaplaincy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, B. Is the sound okay? Yes, okay, I see lots of thumbs up. Thank you. So my presentation today is going to begin with my own personal journey and then discuss why this practice of chanting meditation is difficult, challenging for people across the world today to fully appreciate its value and its power. And then I will conclude with some of the discussions of the details of how chanting as a practice benefits blood pressure, stress reduction, and how as a practice of role-playing is really a very important tool for people who are in crisis, who are trying to manage the stress in their lives, and in a process of self-discovery and for practices of self-care. Now, this is going to be a very sort of practice-oriented presentation. And understanding that many of you who are here are listening are, members of the civil service, this isn't something you say, well, how could I possibly help someone with chanting, right? As a practice of self-care and a means of dealing with stress, anxiety, or crisis. Well, so what I'm going to do is drop into the chat right now the link for the Fo Guangshan Temple in Amsterdam. It has a phone number, it has an email, it has a street address, but I won't torture your ears by trying to pronounce the street name of Zeedijk. So I will leave that to you. I won't give you that painful American pronunciation of your local words there. But there is the details of where you could direct people who are in crisis in Amsterdam. So what is this practice of chanting meditation? What is my journey through it? So around 2000, actually it was December of the year 2000, I was writing my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania on these recently excavated manuscripts from 300 BC. And no one had seen these for 2,300 years. And it was incredibly stressful and difficult. And the anxiety and stress of having really no mentorship for the process of the writing and research was physically very, very, very debilitating. My body could not take the stress anymore. And so I happened upon a Buddhist temple in New Jersey and began a seated meditation class there that met Monday and Friday evenings. And that process of having some time to get away from what had previously been just a nonstop research process, getting a break from it to just focus on my breathing and my posture, right? Enabled me to finish my dissertation, which I received in 2002. And my first job was here where I am now in Boca Raton, Florida. And I began this job here at Florida Atlantic University in 2004. And then the challenge was to produce books, at least one book on this subject and have it published by an academic press, or I would be fired. And so once again, you see the stress level started to really ramp up. And so I was very fortunate to find that there was a Fo Guangshan temple 30 minutes drive from my house. And in January 2005, my wife, actually in Fo Guangshan, we prefer a co-practitioner to focus on the value of what we're trying to do in our practice, of a focus on practice in our lives. My co-practitioner and I began going to this temple. And my first experience with chanting meditation was difficult, right? The words come very quickly in Chinese, and it's very easy to lose your place, right? Trying to keep up with the person to the left of me, to the right of me. Sometimes your eyes will sort of glaze over, and you'll lose your place. You won't know which line we're on. Maybe your eyes will have doubled over on a line and repeated a line by accident. And then blessedly, there will be a page turn and say, here we are, right? And so initially it was a challenge to find any self-care from the practice of chanting. But whilst I found it challenging, what I also started to notice, even with the first time of experimenting with the practice, was that I felt calmer. I felt more centered. I felt that this was a mindful process, because the moment that I began worrying about my research or just life, do I need to put more gas in my car? I had a gas car back then. I have a bill to pay. I have to remember to pay this bill. I would get lost on the page, and I would have to call my mind back, right? Return to the setting where I was listening to the chanting and the musicality and the incense, right? It was this, right, 3D smells, sounds, and also focusing just on my voice and trying to mimic these sounds around me. I found it to be very, very, very helpful, and I felt recharged and able to restart, right, my week after having that Sunday service, right? And you'll see that this temple in Amsterdam, Sunday is members only. That's when they have this chanting service, right? So that's when people could go and participate and try this chanting service once they've reached out to them, called them, emailed, or visited on another day during the week to introduce themselves. And so why is it, though, initially, when I learned that this temple did not have seated meditation and only had chanting, was I initially resistant, right? It was more than just the challenge of following the words on the page. There is this history. I'm in a history department, right? In the early 20th century, there was a lot of rhetoric, both in Japan and China, that chanting and the process of prostrating and bowing, right, to a Buddhist statue was not real Buddhism, right? And that this is more of a cultural element from folk belief that had actually polluted real Buddhist practice, which was simply seated meditation. And that was all that the real Buddhist would do, is a seated practice. My own master, Venerable Master Xingyun, is from the Linji or Rinzai sect of Chan or Zen Buddhism. And 1,000 years ago was when our sect of Buddhism really started to question that seated meditation was the focus, could be the focus of any practice of Buddhism, and that engagement with the world should be what Buddhists do. And the Vimalakirti Sutra, the Platform Sutra, all describe that seated meditation is not the sum total of Buddhist practice. And so that was helpful for me to see that meditation is something that could and should be something that I do at all times, right? In everything that I do. It should not just be limited to a single posture or bodily practice. And I started to appreciate that chanting could be a meditative practice and that all things could be meditative. But I will return to this challenge in a moment, because what happened as I started to participate in this chanting every week is that there were more and more people at the temple who were non-Chinese speakers who were starting to really feel a lot of self-care and comfort and peace and equanimity from this chanting practice. And it became a very interesting experience. I would help to translate. There would be a lecture in Chinese from, we call them venerables. It was a Buddhist nun, but in Foguangsan, we focus on gender equality. So we prefer the name venerable because both monks and nuns, right? That's the term we use to refer to our monastics, right? Our venerable would give a lecture in Chinese and I would translate it into English. We had these earpieces that people could use. And so people started to feel more and more part of this practice. And today, every week, we have a core group of people who are non-Chinese speakers. In fact, one of the Dharma assistants, or Xiangdeng, does not speak any Chinese. He's a Vietnamese American man. We have people who are African American, Cuban American, Colombian American, all kinds of very diverse group of people every week in the temple. And every week, not every week, but we frequently discuss, well, I really needed that, when people are in crisis, or, there was a member who was crying last week. She was undergoing some difficult situations, and she found she stayed enchanted because she felt the importance of that self-care. And so I've been thinking about this more and more over the years. And then something very interesting happened in 2019. I was in Taiwan, in the south of Taiwan, in Tainan, and one of our temples there is called the Huizi Temple. And that is actually the temple that my co-practitioner, my wife, her grandmother, was one of the founding members of. She was there chanting even before there was a temple built there. So I felt a very deep connection to the temple, and our venerable there, she invited us to participate in the morning chanting service, which was really a very beautiful and magical, and I felt very privileged to be there with the other venerables, just, 3 or 4 of them chanting together in the morning. It just felt so peaceful. And then one morning, the abbess of the temple invited us to stay for breakfast. And it was even more privileged to be welcomed into their personal private space there. And when we were talking, the abbess there told me about a challenge that she'd been facing in encouraging Taiwanese people to try chanting meditation. Because you see, there in the south of Taiwan is a company that is today quite very famous called Taiwan Semiconductor. 60% of the world's microchips are made there in factories. And when you stand at the front of her temple, her Buddhist temple, you can see Taiwan Semiconductor's factory. The factories go on for miles and miles, kilometers and kilometers. I forget myself, right? They're huge, huge, huge expanses. And that morning over breakfast, she told me, she said, she's very concerned because she knows the engineers there struggle and have challenges and encounter difficulties, just like everyone else, but they don't have this practice of self-care of chanting because they feel it's this superstitious, right, practice, right, where one would lose oneself, subordinate the individual to the collective, and it would just be for praising to the Buddha, not about their individual process of self-discovery. And she said, Ken, you're an academic. Maybe if you came and gave a talk, maybe they could appreciate the value of chanting, right, for their self-care. Because she saw I really, every morning I was really finding such great peace from being there chanting with them. And that was 2019, December. We all know what happens next, right? So it was not until December 2023 that I was able to fulfill my promise to her. I promised her I would come back and give a lecture to them. And in the interim, I was thinking a lot about how to talk to engineers, how to talk to people anywhere in the world, because we all share this sort of burden, right? Probably coming back to this Protestant Reformation, that ritual, particularly elaborate rituals, are inhibitors to processes by which the individual can feel connected with the divine, right? There's a lot of sort of ghosts in our subconscious that are challenge us and make it difficult to appreciate how a chanting practice and participating in a ritual could be how we find ourselves. And so in the interim, I started reading a lot of scientific literature. And there's something very particular about Buddhist chanting that I want to share with you. And it is that when we chant as a group, we try and keep the sound unbroken, an unbroken tone, right? There's continuity. And what that means from a practical bodily perspective is that we exhale as we chant for a very, very long time. And then we sort of sneak our inhales in, very quick inhalations. It's just naturally how we chant. And we have a leader, right? Our Wainua is the person who's leading the chant, and we're all emulating their chant, right? Sound. And so our breath naturally becomes, right, in sync with this very long exhalations. And when I started reading scientific literature to understand why I felt so calm and mindful and at peace through chanting, studies on chanting, studies on breathing, experimented with what they defined as ujjayi or yogic breathing, which is simply deep inhalations and deep exhalations, right? So they had strapped electroencephalograms, heart monitors, right? All the sort of gear onto the subjects. And first they had them just breathe naturally, right? And then they had them breathe deep in, deep out. Take a deep breath, right? Take deep breaths. And there'd be a sound, right? They'd have to breathe in when they hear the sound and breathe out when they hear the sound. And so they would go from natural breathing to breathing with the sound, and they would just have deep in, deep out. And they found that the deep breaths really did not do very much for their heart rate, for their blood pressure, or their anxiety. But then when they had them long exhalations, or particularly at least double the time exhaling versus inhaling, that was where the magic was, right? And these long exhalations, which is what we will do for an hour and a half at a time, are where the heart rate, where the blood pressure decreases, the heart function increases, and the stress reduces. When I lectured on this in December of 2023, and then April of this year in Austin, Texas, and then June of this year in Tainan, Taiwan, I tried to explain it to people. Imagine at the end of a long day, you come home and you sit down, right? It's this natural response we have of this long exhalation. We sometimes think of it just as this, just a reaction, but actually there's some magic happening when we do that, right? That we're actually, that's part of our self-care practice. And so when we chant, the musicality and the group aspect of it pushes us into these long exhalation patterns, and it's enormously helpful. So I want to segue into the experience that I had that really cemented my appreciation of this. It was around 2007, 2008. I was the vice president of the Fogwangshan Temple up in Boston. And our abbess there, knowing I'm an academic, shared with me a story that she had when there was a big earthquake in Taiwan. And she was taking people through the morgue. It was an elementary school that had been turned into a morgue, and the dead were just laid out on ice in the classrooms. And she was taking people through the classrooms to identify their loved ones. And she said to me, she said, "Ken, I'm telling you this story because sometimes there's no words, right, that can comfort a person, right? And as an academic who is always looking for the right words in my writing and in my lecturing, she really, really touched me deeply with that. And what was interesting and tragic, but also really cemented it for me, was about a month or two later after she gave me that teaching, I was flying and I was at the airport and I saw a woman who had collapsed, and there were paramedics looking after her, checking her vital signs. She was lying there on the ground. I said, wow, my goodness, this poor woman. I was really shocked. It's not something you see very often in an airport. And then maybe 15, 20 minutes later, I was at my gate in line, ready to get on the airplane. And she was behind me in line, actually two people behind me. She was there getting on the flight with me, and she collapsed again. Her knees buckled and she was sitting on the floor for a moment. And, because I was not right next to her, another person helped her to stand up again. She was really not in a good way. And we got on the airplane and she ended up sitting next to me. And I had that teaching. And I did not try to say anything wise to her. And I did not want to listen to her conversation, but she was on the phone talking to a friend saying she really just needed to get home. And her medication was there. And it wasn't clear that she was going to recover. She was very, very ill. And she had the window seat and I had the aisle seat. And I just realized there's no words that I can say. There's not something smart that this academic has to share with her. And so I was just I smiled. I tried to be at peace myself. And when she needed to get up to use the restroom, I said, "Oh, no, it's so good to stand up during these long flights." I just tried to be as nice as possible and just to be there as another human to comfort her. And so when you're facing people in your chaplaincy who are in crisis, to wrap this up, because I believe my time is about at the end, one option, right? I would encourage you, if you're in Amsterdam, I put the information in the chat, but there's also temples all over the world. I saw one of our venerables, Miao Jing from the Philippines, is here. We're in all major cities of the world, all 5 continents of the world. And these temples are places of very warm communities. And this chanting can really be an important part of self-care. I myself I'm very grateful I had this to help me to face the stresses of my life. So thank you, B, for the opportunity to share this with all of you today.
Thank you so much, Ken, Dr. Holloway. Another wonderful presentation, and you can hear in your mind us clapping. And we will now segue into our last speaker before we have hopefully some time for question answers. And our last speakers in this first half of the panel hardly needs any introduction from the Buddhist Chaplaincy. Mary Remington is a globally prolific expert and trainer in Buddhist spiritual care. She is the head of pastoral care training in Upaya Institute and Zen Center, Santa Fe, New Mexico, founded by Joan Halifax Roshi. And I see that she shared her Dharma name, which is wonderful. They have wonderful emptiness, wonderful openness, wonderful sky. Yoku, thank you so much, Mary. Okay, so until recently, Mary Myoku has been Buddhist chaplain and head of spiritual care at a very large hospital in New York. And she brings with her a wealth of experience from contemplative practice in the context of spiritual medical care environment. And a large part of our direct pastoral care work supports people with addiction problems, you could say, and disabilities, and also people at the end of their life. And today she has agreed to share something with us about her experience in one of these areas with a presentation entitled The Medicine of Compassion and Presence with Those Suffering Substance Misuse. Thank you so much for being here, Mary, and take it away. I will spotlight you.
Thank you, B. I'm humbled to be in this company, truly. And just thank you to the collaborators of this beautiful colloquium. I hope that my talk serves and that it brings you into the warmth of your own heart. I've been offering spiritual care to the drug and alcohol recovery community for 7 years at the hospital where I worked as Buddhist chaplain and director of spiritual care. Over the years, I have met hundreds upon hundreds of individuals who have taught me about the nature of suffering, of hope, and healing. And it's in their honor that I speak today. Many of them now crossed over into death from illness, overdose, car crashes, suicides, and crime. Others still suffering in the loops of their addiction, and some living a life without the burdens of alcohol and drugs. But in this moment, I thank them all, even those I can't consciously recall, for how they've opened my heart and been responsible for the shaping of it. I was sitting with a 48-year-old client I will call James. I had known him from a few prior admittances in our rehab unit, and he came to us again, this time after nearly drinking himself to death from vodka. His skin, his eyes were yellow. We were sitting there together in an empty office on the rehab unit, just the two of us, in a one-on-one meeting per his request. His whole body rested on a small chair, curved over like a wave that could not crash. His face was blank. His eyes were staring off beyond me and downward. He eventually said, "Mary, I don't know what is real anymore." He repeated, "I don't know what is real." There was a long pause. I leaned over, I put my hand on his swollen hand. I gently squeezed it and said, "This is real." A couple of tears eventually began to slip down his cheeks, and we continued to sit in silence. He, the wave that still could not crash, now slowly offering drips from his ocean of pain. In this moment with James, I was not there as a Buddhist chaplain with a goal to end his suffering or even ease it. I deeply respect his suffering as it is, for the intricate, infinite causes and conditions that brought him to this point upon the very edge of his life. His suffering is sacred. I was there to share my body as a regulating presence, my heart as warmth, and my attention as real regard. I sat there breathing, bearing witness to his suffering, opening my body, heart, and mind so to feel with him. And in this moment with James in his curled life, intersecting with my own curled life, hands held together, we found and created unity, where the dark and the light could be held at once through compassion. There was no resolution or fixing the despair. This rehab for him was also not the end of his substance use behaviors, which continued after his discharge and still continue to this day. So why does this moment matter? I leave it for you to consider. But for me, it matters because what happened was a moment of conscious connection and kinship. And that moment of union, if even fleeting, I believe ripples out into the fabric of our existence. That dear moment is rippling out through my words right now. It opened my life, and I offer it to you to possibly open yours. We affect one another, and our appamada, known as our heedfulness or our conscientious care, is to engage a life of honoring that every act we take, every word we utter, every thought we have affects the entire universe. This is Indra's net, his infinite net, including multifaceted jewels at each vortex, each jewel being reflected in all the other jewels. The act and well-being of one is the act and well-being of us all. James' suffering is our suffering. His joy is our joy. We quake and we breathe as one body. Our appamada is vital to the flourishing of our existence. Dependent origination, what Thich Nhat Hanh called our interbeing, the implication of all this could easily be boiled down to one simple sentence: we belong to each other. My faith in this belonging ignites a true caring for how I offer myself to life and inspires my Buddhist practice so that I can awaken and sincerely pay attention to all that's here. James' tears were not just tears, they were jewels, reflecting generations of unreconciled pain. They reflected hope. They reflected the sun and the soil. They reflected our hundreds of thousands of years of societal violence and grief. They reflected all of it. My tears, your tears, reflect all this too. Everything matters, and it is up to us to learn how to embody our mattering and our belonging to each other and this reality. I find the substance misuse community often deeply struggle with that sense of belonging to themselves and this world, and this is often the driver to their using. When speaking about addiction, it's helpful to remember that we can be addicted to anything: food, love, sex, gambling, ego, happiness. I just so happen to work with a population that struggles with drugs and alcohol, and there are many faces, including those coming from privilege, with education, social status, and financial means, to those who are born with very little social and economic capital. Often they're experiencing or have been experiencing abusive relationships, broken homes and families, social isolation, mental illness, incarceration, suicide attempts, gang living, unsheltered living, systemic oppressions of every kind, ancestral addiction, unspeakable grief and loss, lack of self-worth, and often a common one. Many suffer not even being able to recognize or look at their own face in the mirror. Suffering addiction means we are living with wounds of the heart, mind, and body. Drugs and alcohol become a way of coping with that which feels unmanageable within. So using creates a way to numb, escape, or soften this pain. And having a trauma-informed view means we as clinicians understand that addictive and self-harming actions can and do originate from unhealed wounds in one's lifetime or transgenerationally, unprocessed and unreconciled feelings, or some kind of inner separation, negation of self. It could be argued that all of us suffer some kind of addiction. Dr. Gabor Mate says, quote, addiction is manifested in any behavior that a person craves, finds temporary relief or pleasure in, but suffers negative consequences as a result of, and yet has difficulty giving up, end quote. It's something to consider. Based on that definition, what may you and I be addicted to right now? Focusing in on alcohol and drugs in particular, and according to the 2023 United States National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 48.5 million Americans aged 12 and older battled a substance use disorder. Why are we numbing? When I ask this question, I also immediately recall and consider our collective suffering with nearly 32 global conflicts at this time, environmental calamity, technology replacing our friendships, capitalistic values and work prioritizing our time over our families, our friends, ourselves. We can find many reasons why we would want to run from the suffering in our personal, interpersonal, and collective dimensions. Even meditation practice can offer a shadow side of retreating from life versus really being in it. The point is, the rejection of fully feeling what is here can and does touch us all in various ways. And the difference is, are we willing to see our habits, patterns, and fears, to look at them clearly and directly and offer them loving awareness as a way of possibly also liberating their grasp? I uplift these kinds of open questions with the rehab community during my weekly group with them every Thursday at 10:15. Often the patients in my groups are exhausted, distracted, eager, anxious, heavily medicated, and some are coming straight from an active life crisis. I can safely say nearly all of them are coming from days, weeks, or years of using and aborting themselves from the realm of difficult feelings, or demonizing themselves for having them at all. For each their own reasons, they have discovered the temporary relief drugs and alcohol give, and also that this temporary relief has become profoundly unsustainable, and for some, a way of playing with death. There they are, collected into one room, most of the time not knowing each other, seeing if they can begin to learn how to bear their life differently, or possibly even love it again. Many say they have literally forgotten who they are. They have lost connection to their worth, and that they want to return to the person they really know themselves to be. It's also important to note our cultural conditions in the room, sitting there in New York, where westernized culture places its patriarchal pride on being in control, not shedding tears, not showing vulnerability. There's a general societal repression upon our collective emotional body, which conditions so many into a kind of guilty stoicism and ultimately creates only more repression, depression, and counteractivity that is harmful. As a chaplain and as a human being, sitting there with my groups, there is so much to meet in the room, and the only way to begin to meet any of it, in my humble opinion, is to breathe and listen. Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen says, quote, listening is the oldest and perhaps the most powerful tool to healing. It is often through the quality of our listening and not the wisdom of our words that we're able to affect the most profound changes in the people around us. When we listen, we offer with our attention an opportunity for wholeness, end quote. Spiritual care for me is grounded in this sincere listening, which is simultaneously a way of regarding each person's human experience without shame, preference, or indifference. When patients feel regarded, naturally there arises a beautiful ripple effect where they begin to relax and to feel safe enough to be in their own skin, to open their voices and be in their deep vulnerability. We start listening to each other. We start listening to ourselves. Tears fall, laughter erupts, stories begin to unfold, and together we begin to detangle from our conditioned and habitual states of defendedness and self-preservation and cultivate the ability to be authentic. What I am saying is so simple, but when we start to attune to our personal truths together, our relational wounds within and without begin to mend. Our feelings of love, connection, and worthiness can emerge from here, helping us place our feet on this earth. Zen Master Dogen says, stop searching for phrases and chasing after words. Take the backward step and turn the light inward. Your body and mind of themselves will drop away and your original face will appear. I feel like my patients and I are all aspiring to remember our original face together. I recall during one group this past year, we were reflecting on what it means to actually be present, what it feels like in our bodies, what's happening in the room when we all begin to drop in. It was a rich and lively dialogue, and the energy in the room was building. And at one point, a 62-year-old patient in the group, I will call Stephen, turned to me and said, Mary, all my life, I've always wanted to be somewhere else. Ever since I was a kid, if I was in bed, I wanted to be in the kitchen. If I was on the playground, I wanted to be at home. If I was eating dinner, I wanted to be playing basketball. Even when my son was born, I recall I wanted to leave the room and be anywhere else. And then he took a moment and his bright blue eyes looked right into mine and he said, this is the first time in my life I've ever wanted to be here, right here, and nowhere else. I smiled and I said, welcome. And then the group all started saying welcome to him. And he looked all around at us, and then he hid his face in his hands, crying. Healing happens in relational fields when we are amongst one another, sharing, listening, encouraging, remembering who we truly are through each other. This is where compassion, thank you. This is where compassion takes place through us all as one participating body, where we are part of the whole with something to give to that whole. We remember we are jewels, interconnected. And often I delight over time to see patients become able to see their own face in the mirror again, their hope landing in their very image. And so many leave our rehab and then return days, weeks, months, or years later because they started to use again or found they could never really stop on their own. At times, I feel it's endless. The relapses, the suffering, the ongoing and repetitive behaviors, all are samsara. I receive phone calls nearly every month from a patient who is intoxicated on the other end of the line, weeping because they're about to use and can't stop themselves. My vow is to pick up the phone, to be still, to listen, and to love them. I bear witness. I return to my breath, I feel with them. Sometimes I cry with them. I offer myself to the struggle that is here, aspiring to push nothing and no one away, and I trust that is enough because it's all I have. From the Mahayana tradition, the Bodhisattva vow. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. How do I free creations if they're numberless? And how do I transform delusions that have no end? These vows are a paradox, and it's inside the paradox that the Bodhisattva comes alive. It's where the Bodhisattva offers up compassion with all her being, because what else can she do when the house is burning? Bodhisattvas let the paradox of impossibility and possibility break the heart into new forms of embodied loving action. This is what happened to Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. With her 1,000 arms, hands, and eyes, she herself broke down into new forms of responsivity and love. She herself became the skillful response. For years on the rehab unit, I have heard the patients say this phrase to each other: you have to learn how to love yourself. This phrase used to leave me feeling confused and unclear on how one actually loves themselves. But over time, this phrase began to feel like a koan for me. What does it mean to love myself really? What is all of this? Over the years of working with this dear community, I think I have found my own response to this koan for now. It's what Stephen was pointing to in that moment, with his face crying into his hands. It's being here fully. Loving oneself is an act of regard and welcome to this moment, of turning nothing away, not our demons, not our angels, not our indifference. It's belonging to all things. Loving oneself is the bodhisattva of mind, meeting this life with a gentle and open hand.
Thank you so much for wonderful, deep and contemplative sharing, Mary. I think we had a fantastic triptych of showing how the most deep teachings can become applied in Buddhist spiritual care, as Jishin did, how we can take our own body with the most simple and sometimes maybe even esoteric, ritualistic or ritual Buddhist practices like Ken did, how we can take our body with us and be transformative there in healing, and finishing with Mary's very, very profound and personal experience, centering listening and being present and staying in the love with our clients, our friends. So thank you very much. Theoretically, we need to stop, but I'm willing to sacrifice 5 minutes of our pause to give you the chance to have some questions, short questions and short answers. So, but not more than 5 minutes. Anybody has something urgent to ask to Jishin, or to Kenneth, or to Mary? Is that a hand, Alie? Yeah. Alie, yeah.
Yeah, yes. Hello to everybody. I have a short question for Nathan Jishin Michon. Is he going to make a book for this explanation of this mandala? That would be very interesting and helpful for us.
I do hope to, maybe by the end of next year, have a combined either 2-volume set with a book and workbook, or somehow combined together. So it should be a little more fully explained there with the practices associated.
Wonderful. Yes, Ulli?
Hello, everyone. I also have a question for Nathan Jishin. The mandala of Taiso, is that a Japanese mandala? Because it looked so Tibetan to me.
Thanks, good question. Just briefly, more originally Indian, and then a version did go into Tibet and also did go through China into Japan. So it is directly related.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Any more questions, or are you ready for the polls? Well, I just have to say thank you so much to our speakers, all in America now, for joining us and giving up their precious time and their wisdom. And I hope we will welcome you often as inspirations and as friends to share and to work together. I will invite you now all to take a bio break. So big hand of applause virtually to everybody. Wonderful, really wonderful. I invite you in a bio break and come back please stiffly at around the half hour. If you're in a time zone that has full hours at the moment, and not in India or in Nepal, but so in 13 minutes, when we have the second part, is this spiritual care, where we will focus on Buddhist spiritual care in the Netherlands. So that will be really, really interesting. So I see you all in now 12 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so we are starting the second part of our panel now. And thank you so much, B, and to the three previous speakers for their contributions. It was really a wonderful first part of the panel. Thanks, of course, also to Foguangshan and all the other institutions, the Humanistic Buddhism centers in Malaysia, in the Philippines, in Taiwan, and University of the West for being part of this 24 hours event, which is quite impressive, also quite exhausting. Okay, before we move on to our speakers, we have, of course, maybe a quick question, because we planned our panel with a 90-minute frame, and my speakers wanted to have the questions right after their presentations. Do we stick to that format, or are we using a similar format as the previous panel? Okay, I will introduce the first speaker. My dear colleague Ulli Fischer, who has been studying Buddhism in the Tibetan tradition for over 20 years. She's a certified Buddhist chaplain with experience in the healthcare setting and prison setting. Currently, she's combining working in the prison with teaching Buddhist spiritual care here at our seminary at the VU. So you're welcome, Ulli.
Thank you, Jens, for the introduction, and hello to everyone. It's so nice to be here and share about what we're doing and how to make the future and also the present more compassionate. So I will share about teaching Buddhist chaplaincy or Buddhist spiritual care at the University of Amsterdam, the Free University. And I want to focus on the interfaith aspect of this curriculum we have developed, because as we might all already know, many times Buddhists work with people that are not Buddhists at all. So we really need to learn to become attuned to many different kinds of people. And also in Buddhism, if you have taken the Bodhisattva vow, you vow to free all beings, so regardless of their religious orientation, which makes also the interfaith approach is very fitting to Buddhism. So from a Buddhist perspective, I would say that compassion also means that you let go of preconceptions you might have, and that you might even let go of your identity, even the identity of being a Buddhist spiritual carer or a Buddhist chaplain. And I will explain this as we go along. So one of the things that is very important when teaching students that want to become a Buddhist spiritual carer is that they become aware of the fact that it's not necessarily wise to speak about Buddhism. And this might be also a little bit frustrating, but in the Dutch context, where we serve so many different kinds of people in the different institutions where we work, it's not always possible to really share about the Buddhist wisdom. But more importantly, it's really important to embody it and to enter into relationships freely. And that is quite an art. So I would also say that at a university, you can only teach so much, but it's also really important for students to have their own practice and to engage with a teacher and a sangha to really practice the presence, because in the limited hours that we have to teach students within the curriculum, we cannot make up for hours of practice that you might do at home or you might have done in your life. And also one characteristic of teaching students in Holland is that we have many different kinds of students from all Buddhist traditions, because it all comes together in the Netherlands. So we don't only have Zen Buddhists or Tibetan Buddhists, we have Theravadins, we have Western Buddhists, atheists, more religious Buddhists. So a choice that was made is to also make a curriculum that includes the wisdom of diverse Buddhist traditions. The Buddhist educational track in the Netherlands started in 2012, and I'm very happy that I was one of the students that were in the first generation of people studying at the VU to become a Buddhist chaplain. And when we started out in 2012, there was no definition of Buddhist chaplaincy at all. And this was told to us, which is quite shocking for a student, because you're, of course, looking for something to hold on to. But yeah, that's just where we started out. So we're learning by doing, and we're pioneering. And I think even now, 10 years, it's more than 10 years later, we're still pioneering and still learning by doing. So that is a very important aspect of the study we try to facilitate. that it's not all there in the books yet. You can't read a chapter and then say, oh, I know, how to do it. But it's really the combination of having a personal practice and background and coming to this profession with all kinds of personal issues and wounds, which are all part of the whole process of becoming a Buddhist spiritual carer. And it's all valuable, especially the painful stuff can be valuable. So when we started out in 2012, there was like more of an expectation that Buddhist chaplains might be involved in their own Buddhist organization as chaplains, or that they might serve other Buddhists, but this has not been the case. So in Holland, the Buddhist spiritual carers, they work in a professional context. And by now we have people working, it started out with the prison, but we also have Buddhist chaplains at the army now, in healthcare, elderly care, in all kinds of professional settings. And you could say that each work setting also has specific needs. And in most settings in Holland, people will work as a chaplain from a certain religious background or a humanistic background, but they will work in a certain part of the organization. So that means they will meet many different people of different faiths and people with no faith at all. And actually, the Justice Department is a little bit different. And that is also where Buddhist chaplaincy started out in the Netherlands. It started out with a Muslim prisoner reading Buddhist books in 1998. Am I saying it right? Yes, in 1998. And he asked for a Buddhist spiritual carer to explain more about the books and to guide him. And the laws in the Netherlands make this mandatory, that then when a prisoner asks for a certain kind of spiritual care, that they provide it. So that's how we started out in Holland. And it already has the theme of interfaith in it. So from the very beginning, you could say, even though we weren't able to name it yet, the theme was there. And this also has to do, of course, with the societal changes that we see everywhere these days, that people are secularizing, they're not believing, there are not as many believers anymore as there used to be. In Holland, we recently, it's once in so many years, they have, how do you say that? They have a poll, and now we have more non-believers than believers in the Netherlands. And a non-believer could be an atheist, but it also could be an agnostic person. And also, of course, we are a multicultural society, a multi-religious society. We have multi-religious belonging. So it's all become very diverse and I would say exciting and wonderful. So actually, the prison is still the place in Holland where you can really work as a Buddhist, because it still has like an old system based on the way the Dutch society was organized in the past and still is in some ways. And it's called pillarization. And this means that Dutch society was organized in a way that it was segmented, that every religion, Catholics, Protestants, but also humanists and also political parties, they had like their own churches, but also schools, newspapers, bakeries, whatever you could imagine. And people living in one segment would also make use of all of these services within their own segment. There was no passing over. This, of course, has changed in the years from the 60s till now. It's in reality, it's almost non-existent anymore. But the Dutch prison still has this system that prisoners are asked to stay with one religion. And so working in the prison, I'm also a prison chaplain, is kind of difficult because this rule is not in accordance with a societal reality. So of course we get prisoners that are not even Buddhist at all, but they're just feel a certain sympathy with it. So they ask for a Buddhist to come to talk to and to meditate with. So it's very fascinating that we get all kinds of people we are allowed to talk to. And sometimes they are more Buddhist than I am because they've been in prison for 10 or 20 years practicing meditation. Other times they have certain ideas about Buddhism, especially the idea, oh, it's not a religion, it's just a way of life. And that really comforts them. And sometimes you have to cut through that, and other times you leave it. Because as a chaplain, we try to really tune into the person that we meet. And now I'd really like to go a little bit deeper on the subject of interfaith, because what does that really mean when you work with people? In 2017, the first meta-analysis was done on research papers about interfaith chaplaincy. So not restricted to Buddhist chaplaincy, but just interfaith chaplaincy. And then this research was done mostly in the United States and also in Europe. And they found like 22 papers written about the subject, and certain themes emerged. There's like two things that are really important. One is normativity, and this means, would you like to be an interfaith chaplain or not? So this can be divided into a universalist or a particularist approach. A universalist will want to work with everyone. A particularist might have problems with this. And it also, of course, depends on your religious beliefs, because some religions believe that it's important to have a purity. And I think Buddhism, at least how I understand it, does not have this. We have a great openness. So for a Buddhist, it's not a problem to work with all kinds of faith. So I would think that most Buddhist chaplains, if you want to call them a chaplain, because that is a Christian term, that they will be universalist. That is so. One thing is really, does it fit your identity? That's one question a chaplain has to ask themselves. And there might also be certain borders, like praying with people. For one Buddhist can be wonderful, and for another Buddhist it can feel very awkward. So we try to encourage the students to really reflect on this and to go deeply into it and explore which interventions are fitting to them. Then also, there are certain capacities you need to work as an interfaith chaplain, and it also means that it's important to know also about the other religions or ways of the way people look at life, because of course it's not only religious views, but it's political views, or it's humanistic views, or maybe New Age spirituality. So actually becoming a spiritual carer really asks of people to become sensitive to all these different belief systems that we meet in this current age. And of course, you cannot know all, so it's important to learn to ask questions and not provide answers so easily. So as Mary Remington already mentioned, listening is a very, very important skill. Instead of fixing, just being there and exploring the strengths that are living within a person. That is one of the most important skills, I would say, that we have to learn as Buddhist spiritual carers. Okay. Also in this meta-analysis, they had some patient perspectives, very, very little, but the patients or the clients, however you would like to call them, they mentioned what they found important in a Buddhist or in a spiritual care was especially kindness, respect, humor, and friendship. religion was not mentioned. So this says something about the profession we are in. When speaking to people, Buddhist chaplains and all chaplains, I would say, have to speak many languages. And then there's like two terms that are important. One is neutralizing. That means that you create a common language. And the other is code switching. That means moving between different religious languages. So this is a skill a chaplain really needs to acquire when doing this work. And the most important is probably to create a third space, or a space between all belief systems or religions, a safe, compassionate space. And in the Buddhist literature, you would also find a non-anxious, compassionate presence as a very important trait of a Buddhist spiritual carer. And this non-anxious, compassionate presence actually, I would say, is the one important ingredient that will create this third space. So Buddhist chaplaincy is not only about skills and knowledge, but very much about your own presence and the way that we cultivate compassion and presence. I would like to round up my talk with a little quote from a book that was one of the first books written on Buddhist spiritual care, Benefit Beings, and by Danny Fischer. And he talks about the very first Buddhist chaplain in the United States, and her name was Madeleine Coy Bastis. She was the first broad certified chaplain in the United States, a priest in the White Plum lineage of Soto Zen, and ordained in 1993. And when she started working, the first day she went to work, she wore her rakusu, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's her garment, the priest garment. She wore it to work in the hospital, and all day long she talked to patients about Buddhism. When she went home at night, she folded up her rakusu and put it away, and the next day she went in her regular clothes. And she ended up talking to the patients all day about their own spirituality. And this, to me, is a beautiful example of what it means to be compassionate and to give up your identity and preconceptions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ulli, for that wonderful talk. And I just noticed I messed up the order in the program because I just followed the biographies that you sent me. So our next speaker who was supposed to be first is, of course, Alie Rozendal. So sorry, Alie, for messing up the order. Alie Rozendal is the head of the Buddhist Chaplaincy at the Dutch Armed Forces since May 2020. And before this, she has worked for 9 years as a Buddhist chaplain in the prison system. Alie is also a former colleague of mine when I wasn't there at the seminar. She has taught at the seminar from 2015 to 2018 and served as a student supervisor. She is also a certified MBSR trainer, is practicing in the Zen Buddhism at the Zen River Temple, and is a pupil of Tenkai Roshi, the abbot. So please, Alie, welcome. Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Jens, for your introduction. As you see, I wear my uniform as this head of chaplaincy at the Dutch Armed Forces. I think that will give some idea how we have to show up now and then. I think Jens always also mentioned it's very fresh branch of Buddhist chaplaincy in the Netherlands. This at the Armed Forces, which started at May 2020. And it was because of the Buddhist Union of the Netherlands asked for permission to the Ministry of Defense to deliver Buddhist chaplaincy to the military men and also the civil members who worked at the ministry. So it took almost 2 years before we could enter there. And I started in May and I got one colleague in November 2020. And there was some, you know, you all will remember these days. These were the days of the pandemic. And so when my colleagues started, we just immediately entered the second lockdown. So we had to stay home and work from our own private space. So we decided to write an article about what we are planning to do, but also we could start to make a program of what we can deliver to the military people. There is in the middle of the Netherlands, in the center, is a big house, an environment where all the chaplains of the Dutch Armed Forces can offer their conferences, workshops, teachings, seminars, things like that, and meetings. You can use this beautiful environment, and we could use that as well during this pandemic, because when you stayed 100 meters from each other, and you could start to work with small groups. And so we started with offering courses, 2-day course, for example, about introduction of Buddhism. And we started with retreats, 3 days retreats. And we started with 1-day retreats. And we started with organizing workshops from teachers from outside, from the different traditions in the Netherlands. So that was maybe, I think it's different, much different than my work in the prison, because then I knew exactly where the people were in the prison where I had to go to. But now I had to wait when somebody was calling for me. And because we started all these programs, people came to us. And then we get, so in the years, we now 4.5 years further, we know a part of this big organization, because we are only with the two of us, and are more than 60,000 people working here in the Dutch Armed Forces, and lots of spaces we cannot go because we cannot be everywhere. I think Ulli also already mentioned something about the way it's organized. So Buddhist Chaplaincy is one of the 7 denominations in the Dutch Armed Forces. We have this Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, and humanistic colleagues. And most of them work on the barracks or on the hospital or in the teaching institutes or all these places. And because we are just with the two of us, we don't go there. But last year we asked for 2 more colleagues, 2 more Buddhist chaplains, so we can get form a team with 4 people. And these 2 new colleagues have to go to the barracks as well. So they are Buddhist chaplains, but in a very interfaith and almost secular environment. So that gives us much more information what's going on the working grounds, on the playgrounds, and also so it gives us lots of information, but also it helps us to fine-tune our offerings, our teachings, the seminars, because what are the people looking for? So it's very interesting now to see this, to get to know these military people, you know, in this time of increasing threats of war. You know, the war in Ukraine we are involved as well. We're not really fighting, but there's groups of military people are in close to Ukraine and work there together with other military people from other countries. We're very involved in this. So it's asking a lot of the people, and it's asking a lot of chaplaincy as well. Are we prepared to go there? And what does it mean to be a Buddhist and to go there? And what do we offer? So this is a very actual and interesting questions we are thinking about. We don't have answers yet. We not have a program to offer and to prepare this military men for these actions they have to go, because until now they're just practicing. They're practicing, and they hope they practice for something that will never happen now, and that will be a real war. But now that's really coming close, and it's you can feel it in this organization. There's some stress is growing. The discussions are different. The programs are different. This some of the in the teaching of the military people who are coming in, young men and women, they skip the teachings of the chaplaincy because there's no much less time to prepare them. So we have to fight for space to get close to this pupils. I would ask them. I would call them. So it's very new and difficult, and also very exciting. I think place we now offering this Buddhist chaplaincy, and I think we can be, and that's different than I think in the prison. We really are asked as a Buddhist chaplain, we have to be, but we work with non-Buddhists. So we work a lot with people who are interested in Buddhist. And in fact, most of the time they are interested in rest, in becoming calm, and to deal with all the stress they have to go with. And well, I think it's about, this topic of today's compassion. It's not a word that's much used in these armed forces. I think the people who work there, this compassion, how can you be a compassionate warrior? How can you be a compassionate soldier? But still, it's a word we use in the teachings or in the conferences we offer. And maybe it's not that we talk all day about compassion, but we talk about to be a real human being, and about interconnectedness, and about how to deal with this. How do these soldiers have to go to the battlefield and be compassionate human beings? So this is really an interesting topic to talk. So with some soldiers and some commanders, we can talk about this, and they have to make some. I think they have to make a switch, that they cannot see the people they shoot at or they fight to as human beings, because they cannot do their work. But it's very interesting split in their minds, and some of them are really suffering about it. And well, that's very work for us to do. And there's a lot of PTSS as well. We work with the veterans as well, and people who've been in Afghanistan or Iraq or Mali or places like that. They were not really in a war, but they were in I think in violent environment. And lots of people got PTSS and asking themselves for years, who am I? How could I do this? What happened to me? And now that makes us thinking about how can we make some preparation for them before they go there. How can we give them something, teach them something that can help them to be to fall, when everything falls apart, when in the place you go, how can there something be inside of you that you can count on in every position you are? So that's really interesting topics we're busy with, and we're thinking about, and we're not able to write about it yet, because we just, with the two of us, we're just busy doing all the work that has to be done. But that is really something that in the future we might, I think, write about, think about, discuss about with colleagues. And maybe in the USA there are lots of Buddhist chaplains. I've met some colleagues in Korea, South Korea. I think there are a few Buddhist chaplains now in Australia. And well, that will be interesting how we can do this work and offer our teachings and adapt our teachings to these military people. Mary Remington talked about addiction, and that made me get something of aha, because this is something that it's really, really, really going on in the armed forces as well. Maybe not in that way Mary is facing, but people are used to suppress all the things they feel. So they work all day hard. There's a real comradeship and they work together, and there's a very tough peer group they belong to. But in the evening they have to drink a lot of beer because they don't want to feel what they're really feeling. So here is something really we can do good work as well, because we can help them to check in, to do some reflection, to get a healthy way of reflect of what the day brought you and how you acted in that way, and to make this different. It's important that they have this big comradeship and they can count on each other. They have to work, they have blindly, what the drills are and what you have to do and what situation. But you're still a human being. So situations have impact on you. So they have to learn. I hope we can give them some tools to do some proper reflection and to relax and to maybe to do some ritual or to do some things that can help them to face all the things they're going through, instead of becoming kind of one way fighting monsters and forget about humanity. So I think that's a very important task I see that is a very important task of us, and we call this also in the lessons we give as chaplaincy in the armed forces. We're a lot involved in the moral education of the pupils who are coming in, and also I think it's, although I'm wearing this uniform, I have a rank as an officer, but I'm not a military people. It's important for you to know that we are non-combatant. We're not allowed to touch even one weapon, even though not this fake weapons, just to show up or to do some play with. We're really non-combatant. We're part of the army, but we're not from the armed forces. We just are a safe space for the people who work at the armed forces to go to be. They can tell us everything. We don't have to report. We don't have to tell them to the commander that he's drinking all the night and you have to dismiss him or something. They really can tell us everything. That's, I think, important too. It's also the same system in the prison. For that, so we kind of a place in the armed forces where you can, empty your heart, empty your bucket, and so this compassionate listening is very important as well. That's maybe a core business, I think, to do, apart from the lessons and the retreats we offer. Another thing we do because we are this Buddhist chaplain and we are supposed to represent all the Buddhist traditions and sanghas in the Netherlands, we are able, and that's not the same in prison, but we invite monks or teachers from different traditions to come for a workshop or something, and to there are always some of 20, 25 people that show up who are interested. So last Thursday we offered, and it was the second time we did, a memorial service, and it was led by 3 Thai monks, and it was very you know, a Thai ritual. They brought all the stuff to the chapel we have on our environment, and we had a really nice, beautiful Thai ritual and memorial service, and people really appreciate that we are doing this in the Buddhist, even if in this Buddhist tradition. Now something else we are doing is this 3 days retreat, and we offer it for people, you know, to do this for once or twice, and to get familiar with it. And a lot of people who come to this 3-day retreat, we start on Tuesday evening and end at the Friday afternoon. They have none and some experience with meditation. And they come there and they sit and they sit and they sit, and they talk to the teacher who is leading this retreat. We do that not by ourselves. We ask a Zen teacher or a Vipassana teacher. But it's really very, it opens my heart when I see how they really sit there and be quiet, and how they open up in these days, and to be together in silence. And well, I think it's a magic. I think it's always some magical experience, and I'm very happy we can offer that, because that was impossible in prison, because you cannot keep your prisoners by night out of their cells. So it was something I was really happy that we were able to organize this in the armed forces. In this second secular environment is something that Ulli already mentioned, is interesting as well, how to adapt the Buddhist teachings and adapt our own practice. We are lay practitioners. We're not priests. We're not Buddhist teachers. We're professionals with a practice by